in case of the occasional California earth tremor. Then, with the swift efficiency of someone who had dealt with minor wounds, his own and others, he found a clean towel and staunched the flow. Going into the tiny bathroom, he washed the site and used superglue to close the gash. The cut wasn't deep. It would hold. He tied on his running shoes and stepped outside into the short, bent, wet grass that covered his acreage. The rosemary hedge that grew at the edge of his front porch released its woody scent. The newly washed sunlight had burned away the fog, and Adam started running uphill toward town, determined to get breakfast, then come home to bed. Now that the sculpture was done and the storm had passed, he needed the bliss of oblivion, the moments of peace sleep could give him. Yet every year as the Ides of March and the anniversary of his failure approached, nightmares tracked through his sleep and followed him into the light. They were never the same, but always a variation on a theme. He had failed, and in 2 separate incidents, people had died. The route was all uphill. Nevertheless, each step was swift and precise. The sodden grasses bent beneath his running shoes. He never slipped. A man could die from a single slip. He'd always known that, but now, 5 years later, he knew it in ways he could never forget. As he ran, he shed the weariness of a long night of cutting, grinding, hammering, polishing. He reached the asphalt and he lengthened his stride, increased his pace. He ran past the cemetery where a woman knelt to take a chalk etching of a crumbling headstone, past the Gothic museum run by local historian Freya Goodnight. The Gothic general store stood on the outside of the lowest curve of the road. Today the parking lot was empty. The rockers were unoccupied, and the store's 16-year-old clerk lounged in the open door. "How you doing, Mr. Ramsdell?" she called. He lifted his hand. "Hi, Tamerlane." She giggled. Somehow, on the basis of him waving and remembering her name, she had fallen in love with him. He reminded himself that the dearth of male teens in the area left him little competition, but he could feel her watching him as he ran past the tiny hair salon, where Daphne was cutting a local rancher's hair in the outdoor barber chair. His body urged him to slow to a walk, but he deliberately pushed himself. Every time he took a turn, he looked up at Widow's Peak, the rocky ridge that overshadowed the town, and the tower, the edifice built by the Swedish silent film star, who in the early 1930s had bought land and created the town to her specifications. At last he saw his destination, the Live Oak, a 4-star restaurant in a 1-star town. The 3-story building stood at the corner of the highest hairpin turn and housed the eatery and 3 exclusive suites available for rent. When Adam arrived, he was gasping, sweating, holding his side. Since his return from the Amazon basin, he had never completely recovered his stamina. Irksome. At the corner of the building, he turned to look out at the view. The vista was magnificent. Spring green slopes, wave-battered sea stacks, the ocean's endless surges, and the horizon that stretched to eternity. During the Gothic Jeep tour, Freya always told the tourists that from this point, if a person tripped and fell, that person could tumble all the way to the beach, which was an exaggeration, mostly. Adam used the small towel hooked into his waistband to wipe the sweat off his face. Then disquiet began its slow crawl up his spine. Someone had him under observation. He glanced up the grassy hill toward the olive grove and stared. A glint, like someone stood in the trees' shadows watching with binoculars. Watching him. No, not him. A peregrine falcon glided through the shredded clouds, and seagulls cawed and circled. Birders came from all over the world to view the richness of the Big Sur aviary life. As he watched, the glint disappeared. Perhaps the birder had spotted a tufted puffin. Adam felt an uncomfortable amount of relief in that. It showed a level of paranoia to imagine someone was watching him, but he had learned never to ignore his instincts. The hard way, of course. He stepped into the restaurant doorway, and from across the restaurant he heard the loud snap of the continental waiter's fingers.